A Christmas Story Christmas movie review. Hi, I'm Brian Pombo. Welcome back to Brian J. Pombo Live. I'm a little bit of a nut for A Christmas Story, and one of my favorites. I got the lamp. I got the leg lamp. I've got the a whole bunch of other things that people keep buying me, including this mug with a spinning lamp. I've always been a fan of that movie early on, before a lot of other people were, because my family was. They grew up watching that movie. I'm going to tie in some business lessons, so stay tuned for this. First, I want to give an overall review for the movie. So for those of you who don't know, A Christmas Story Christmas is set as kind of a sequel of sorts, set I guess 40 something years later in the future, past the 1935 setting of the original Christmas Story movie, which was filmed back in 1981 or what have you. I think it came out in 82, and it was it's one of these classics that gets shown on TV a lot. I still know a handful of people that have never seen it all the way through, but it is one of those that most people have seen way too often, and a lot of people are sick of it. So it's just one of those movies, but it still has one of these things that it's kind of become a bit of a classic over the years, as it's gotten shown over and over and over again on television. It's one of those I like. I'm a big fan, not just of Christmas Story, but of Gene Shepard, who wrote it and narrated it. He was a radio guy. This is a good book on him, Excelsior, You Fathead. It's all about Gene Shepard. It's a very interesting character, and I'm going to get into that in a second too, because he wrote all these stories previously. A lot of them, he had a lot of improv elements. There was a little bit of autobiographical work in there, but also there was a lot of stuff in there that was completely fabricated just from his sick mind, and he worked in all these characters and real people that he grew up with, actual names of real people that he melded all together into this these stories, which were all kind of separate stories and all got kind of weaved together into the original Christmas Story movie. Now, this current movie was a directed television event. It was shown on HBO. If you have HBO Max, you can watch it, and it's a totally different thing. Ralphie, the child from the first movie, comes back home to visit his mother in the original house. Gets to see friends from the original movie, and it's the best way to describe it is the return to Mayberry type feeling. So those episodes of TV shows that are done way in the future, where they bring all the actors back to kind of reminisce about what happened. This is like a really high-end version of that. And the more I think about it, the more I liked it. It's actually one it's grown on me. I watched it once and then got to see bits and pieces of it while my kids were watching it. And the more I think about it, the more I like what they did with this, even though it actually completely depletes the original message of the original film and the direction that Gene Shepard was taking things. But let's take a look at what the original message was. One of the things that Gene Shepard loved to harp on, so he had this radio show where he'd just sit there and talk. This is back in the 60s and 70s, that he had this late night show where they just let him sit there and he'd sit and tell stories, and he'd have a little bit of dialogue with voices that weren't on this actually on the set. You couldn't hear the other person most of the time. He would be talking with them and throwing things out there and asking them questions, waiting for a reply and then replying back. And he had a very, very unique style, reminiscent really more of modern day talk radio. If you ever had heard any of Rush Limbaugh from the 1990s, I think he borrowed a lot of that style of just completely dominating the conversation and having a direction that he was wanting to take it, but being entertaining enough to be able to pull it along. But the thing about Gene Shepherd is he wasn't super political. What he was slightly a provocateur, and he was trying to, he had a definite message, and it was sentimentality. So he was against sentimentalism. He was against, honestly, against nostalgia. And he would tell all these stories of all these things growing up and all these things he dealt with, but it always had this underlying sarcasm to it all. And he would always say it's not as great as everyone always makes it out to be. And there were all these underlying issues and everything else. Fast forward it to the early 80s, when you had Bob Clark helped construct this script. Bob Clark was the director of the original Christmas Story. He constructed a movie based on all of Gene Shepherd's work. He worked a little bit with Gene Shepherd in the early days to make sure that it all melded together and see if there was anything he was missing. He put in a little bit of himself into it and made a sweet story that still had that edge to it, especially for the early 80s, had an edge to it that took away a lot of the sentimentality, but at the end it had a good, clean ending, and you felt good about the movie. It was a good movie overall. It had a lot of balance to it, even though it's just a bunch of small stories that are all kind of weaved together over this period of time. So this is the original movie. Over time, that movie has built on a nostalgia all its own, where you have people that are crazy about this stuff, and they buy, and they've got all these different knickknacks and commercialism, all this stuff that Gene Shepherd couldn't stand. Everything that he stood for was the opposite of what Christmas Story has become. But also in his own, if you were to follow his own personal life into the 1970s, it was not the family life. He left his I believe it was his second wife and his children, and never had any communication with them. Was not a part of their life. Went on, lived his own life, seeking fame and fortune through radio and television and movies, and wanting to be something much more bigger. And he left behind a lot of that family life that we would normally associate with something healthy. And and there's a whole bunch of debate about what he did with his life and whether it was good or bad or otherwise. But it's not the type of thing that you would want to show years later of what Ralphie had become. So fast forward it to today, Peter Billingsley went and took this character and said, what if we took what we want Ralphie to be? What if we took him forward? What if we took this relationship that Gene Shepherd clearly didn't have with his old man, but we had the relationship we want him to have with his old man, and interweave that together? And I'm not going to ruin it for you, for those of you who haven't seen it, but once you see it, you get a feel for, okay, this is how it should have been, while also giving a whole lot of nod to Gene Shepherd and the direction he ended up going with his life. I thought it was a really good depiction of what a Christmas Story, what that character, what Ralphie Parker should have been. He seemed to make that happen with this movie. It's not a perfect movie. It's by far nowhere near what the original Christmas Story was, but it doesn't need to be. It's kind of it's a wrap up. It's a conclusion. All of these things, and the character that Ralphie portrays is somebody that, I'm going to tie in the business here, okay? He's wanting to be something. He's wanting to go somewhere, and it doesn't all turn out the way he wants it to. But in the end, it turns out the way it's supposed to. And I think that's the real message. That's the business message from this movie. Go and watch it, and you'll see what I mean. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this was worth watching or worth recommending to others? Love to find out. Hey, you have a Merry Christmas wherever you are. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, get out there and let the magic happen.